Hello YouTube, I'm back with the second video on how to make my star inlay. My videos have been taking a little bit longer to make than I was hoping. It's because I'm new to the whole video editing thing and I've been taking some time to try and figure everything out. I've already shot a lot of the footage for all of my videos. I just need to get them into the format and figure out how to edit them properly and all of that. It's kind of been struggle. I'm not used to doing that kind of thing. So after this video, I'm hoping that the next videos will come along much quicker, but I am putting a lot of effort into each one to try and get them to you as quick as possible. I have a lot of things that I want to do over the next year or the next couple of years, a lot of different inlays and projects and just a lot of things, and time is kind of my enemy at this point. But anyways, the second video is all about cutting the wedges on the table saw and how to do it as efficiently as possible. If you have any questions after the video, feel free to ask me in the question section. I'll get back to you as quick as possible. I'm usually pretty quick at answering questions there, or you can find me on my Instagram page and I'll be happy to answer any other questions there as well. Thanks for watching. Let's get on with making these wedges. Now that my table saw jig is made, I'm going to take these 4 blocks of poplar and I'm going to mark them so that I can cut them to the right width. They're just 3/4 of an inch thick, nothing special. You can use any kind of wood that you want for this. I want to cut it about 1/16 of an inch taller than my flat spot on the jig. As you can see, the poplar blocks are the same length as the jig that I've made. You don't want them to be longer than the jig. Being shorter than the jig is fine though. I've chosen poplar for this because I have a lot of mahogany veneer and the poplar is going to be a good contrast for that veneer. You can use any wood that you want. I prefer using a cheaper wood for this because you're only going to see the end grain of it. You don't need to use a really expensive wood to do this project. Poplar's fairly inexpensive and it's a light color, so it's easy to find a veneer that's going to contrast it. I have also used darker woods for the core of the star inlay, like ebony, walnut, or wenge. As long as you have a contrasting veneer to go with the wood, because that contrasting veneer is actually what really sets the star inlay apart. For my veneers, I typically keep an eye out for whatever's on sale. I don't need anything special for this. I just need a plain wood to use as a contrasting color for the main core of the inlay or any other inlay that I may be making. Now that my poplar is all cut and trimmed to properly fit the table saw jig, I'm ready to start cutting my wedge-shaped pieces for the core of the star inlay. This next step is why I like making my table saw jigs out of solid surface. As you can see, I need to be able to hold that piece of poplar in place, and I don't like using double-sided tape. I like Super 77 to spray on the surface. You don't want to get the Super 77 on the bottom of the jig because it has to ride on the bed of the table saw. It'll just make it harder to push through there, so I use a piece of scrap material that I've cut to keep overspray from getting on the bottom, and I typically spray it at about a 45-degree angle, and I move across the piece at a medium pace like that. I usually will do 2 coats of the Super 77, then feel to see if it's tacky. If it's still really wet, I'll wait for a couple minutes and then touch it again just to see how it feels, and then I can push the piece into place and I'm ready to cut. With my table saw blade set at a 90 degree, I set the fence so that the blade is just off of the bottom lip of my template, roughly about a 32nd of an inch. You don't want the blade to actually touch the jig because you don't want to remove any material off of the jig. Once you start to remove material off of the jig, eventually you're going to end up having to remake the jig. Now that everything's set up, it's time to start making the cuts. You don't really want to pay attention to what's going on the outside of the jig. You want to pay attention to the jig itself to avoid any kind of kickback or anything like that. The piece that's on the outside will just fall away and be fine. For each point on the star, you're going to need 2 of the wedges cut out of poplar. There's 4 points to this particular star, so you're going to need 8 wedges. I like to cut extra just to make sure that I have enough in case there's an issue with one of them. These 3/4 inch blocks of poplar will give me 3 wedges each. After making the cut, you can see that I just use a razor blade to pop the wedge out of the jig. You can also use a pocket knife or a chisel, whatever will get in between there and pop it off. It comes out pretty easy, and after I pop the wedge out, I simply set the jig aside and make sure I cover the bottom and put 2 quick coats of the Super 77 on again and quickly stick the next piece that I'm going to cut onto the jig. You're going to need a fresh coat of Super 77 on the jig after you make each cut. Once you pop that wedge out of there, it kind of loses its tackiness and it won't hold the next piece in place. I find that just 2 quick sprays over the jig holds the piece in perfectly. Now, I waited until the end of my cuts after I cut out the 12 wedges before I actually cleaned my jig off. If you're worried about buildup, you can clean it off in between every, 5 or 6 cuts if you want. It's up to you. Lacquer thinner takes the Super 77 right off. It's almost no effort at all. I filmed this whole process in real time just to give people an idea of how long it actually takes to cut these wedges out. I think the total time from start to finish on cutting the poplar was 13 minutes, and I cut a total of 12 wedges. So that's a little over a minute per wedge. That's cutting it, popping it out of the jig, and then reapplying the Super 77 spray. This process actually goes by pretty quick. The saw blade that I'm using is a 12-inch triple chip 80-tooth Amana blade. You can use a multitude of blades for doing this. I've just found that this particular blade gives me a fairly smooth cut. I don't really want to go back and sand the surface of the wedges after I cut it, so I don't want a rough cut there. And sanding the edges is going to possibly change the angle or the shape of the wedge, and I don't want to do that. It doesn't have to be a perfect cut, but you want it to be fairly smooth because you're going to be gluing your veneers to it. You can see a little bit of a burn mark on some of the pieces after I cut it. That's because my blade wasn't quite sharp. It was ready to be changed out, but I figured I would make these last couple cuts before I went ahead and got it sharpened. Those burn spots, they don't matter. You're not going to see them, and you don't need to take the effort to go back and sand them out. I'm getting 3 wedges out of each piece of poplar, and as I cut them, I'll cut the 2 outside edges of each poplar block first. The core that's left over, that you can see laying there on the table saw, has 2 nubs on it. What I'll do is at the end, after I've cut all 4 blocks and I have the center pieces left over, I'll take a sharp chisel or a knife and I'll cut those nubs off so that it will attach flat to my jig. That's where I get the extra 4 wedges from. The nice thing about a project like this is you can break it down into stages or processes. I know that sometimes this can get tedious, and people say all the time that you must have a lot of patience to do that type of work, and I really don't. What it is I will do each step one thing at a time, and when I get tired of it, I'll put it to the side because I always have other things that I need to be working on. I always have other projects that are in the works. So when I'm working on a project like this, I'll work on it until basically I'm tired of working on it. And then I'll set it aside and maybe come back a day or 2 days later when I have a little bit more patience. It's not a matter of patience. It's just a matter of taking your time and being accurate with the things that you're doing. The rest of this video is just showing in real time me cutting each poplar wedge. It's going to give you an idea of how long this process actually takes. If you have any questions about what you've seen in this particular video or previous videos that I've made, feel free to ask in the comments section. You can also ask me on my Instagram page if you follow me on Instagram. I'm pretty quick at answering the questions, and if there's a particular question that you need really clarified, I can elaborate on that in the next video that I'm already working on now, but will probably still take me a week to complete. I'm new to the whole video editing thing, and sometimes it takes me a little while to get them pushed out. I've already shot a lot of footage for this. I just need to compile it into each segment and edit it, and that seems to be what's slowing me down at this particular point. But I'll do it as quickly as I can and get them up as quick as I can so that you guys can continue on with this project if you're following along and trying. If you're just watching it for fun, that's fine too. Thanks for following, thanks for watching, and thanks for participating.